Hello again, and welcome back to the That Was Stupid podcast. I am your host, John Seidel, back again for another episode. And I am really excited for you to hear from our guest this week. Her name is Lara Casey Isaacson. And if you're a woman especially, you have seen her handiwork. She is a rock star when it comes to women entrepreneurs. She started a company called Southern Weddings, which is a magazine you've probably heard of. And she also started a company called Cultivate What Matters. And in fact, she went viral for something that she did years back that is still going viral today. And so we're going to talk about all of that with her. But first, the That Was Stupid podcast, remember, is brought to you by the Veritas Creative. If you have a book inside of you, if you have an idea that you want to get out, if you have digital media work that you need done, whether it's video creation, whether it's social media cultivation, go ahead and go to theveritascreative.com and fill out the form, and they can have a chat with you, which will be me having a chat with you, talking about what you can do, what we can do together. So go to theveritascreative.com. So Lara Casey Isaacson, I met her at a conference a few 6 months ago, and we immediately hit it off. And we'll talk about that story a little bit, but she is just a powerhouse. And so if you want to know about what it takes to start a company, the fear, the success, if you want to know what it takes to balance a schedule, if you want to know what it takes to feel burned out, if you want to know what it looks like to say goodbye to something good, man, this episode is for you. And if you also just want to peek behind the scenes of Southern Weddings and Cultivate What Matters, you should listen to. So without further ado, let's talk to Lara Casey Isaacson on the That Was Stupid podcast. Lara, thank you so much for joining the That Was Stupid podcast. And we kind of joked right before we got on. I made sure that I got that pronunciation right. And you said I nailed it, right?
You did. In fact, my own father would say Laura sometimes. So I really answer to anything, but I feel so loved by your It's great. So thank you, my friend. I'm so grateful to be here.
Great. Yes. Well, see, I actually put a lot of stake in getting people's names because so many people butcher mine. They say John Seidel. And
interesting.
And I'm like, no, it's German. The first vowel does the walking. The second vowel does the talking.
Oh, I like that.
So the first vowel is silent in German. And then anyways, and so I really just put a lot of stake into that.
Well, I have to say it does show your care for people. And that's something I know about you as your friend, but just that you care enough to love people through pronouncing their name right. Well,
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I love that you called me a friend because it's such an interesting, I talked about this earlier in the season. There was someone else I had met recently, actually at the same conference that I ended up interviewing, Bryson Kessler. And there's certain people that you meet and you just really hit it off with. And It was so funny because we're at Harvard, we're both speaking at this conference, and we just end up like sitting at the same table. And I didn't know who you were. I will readily admit I am not your target market for the companies that you have started.
Which is okay.
and you were just like so great. And we hit it off. And I think by the end, like I was like cheering you on during your talk. And we were just like, it was just awesome.
We were made to be buddies. Totally.
And so I really, and then I found out who you were and what you did. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Right. What a humble person.
Well, I felt the same, John. I felt the same. I was like, oh, he doesn't mess around.
So I'm really excited about this conversation. And so I think we're going to talk about so many things, but I think especially when it comes to your That Was Stupid moment, it's really knowing when to move on. It's really knowing when to say goodbye to a good thing. I wrote a post earlier this summer about like when to say goodbye to a good thing. And I think that's a big part of your story. And so I want to get into that, but let's just kind of get an overview. Who is Lara Casey Isaacson?
I'm grateful there's that. So thank you again. I am a mom to 3. I've been married to my husband, Ari, for 18 years. We have quite the story, which is for another day, but it really does shape everything that I've done. We had a really rocky marriage in the beginning, and came from two different faith perspectives in the beginning. And the Lord healed that, not in a snap of a finger, but over many years through many hardships. And so as I was creating Southern Weddings magazine, which I created from the ground up with just my cat, who is not the same cat as this one, but we do have one of my cats here. So I'm still working with a feline. When I created that magazine, I had the heart to just give something new and different to people in the South. I was just excited about telling people stories. What I didn't know is that my story with Ari would be one of those stories that was transformed. So God healed our marriage. And around the time of our 5th anniversary issue of Southern Weddings, the mission changed to love never fails. And we know, John, you and I, that it's really God's love that never fails, not our human love. And that's the bedrock on which I built Southern Weddings from that moment on. We enjoyed a partnership with Southern Living that same year because of that renewed mission and heart. It just came through in everything that we did. And then people started asking me for more business advice. And how do you do this? How do you do this with no publishing background? How does one make things happen? I started a conference by that same name, the Making Things Happen conference. And then that led to us creating prints that said love never fails. We wanted to get this mission into the hands and hearts of people so that it wasn't just about getting one issue of the magazine. And of course, that grew into what is now Cultivate What Matters, which is an online e-commerce company with heart of gold to help women cultivate what matters, not just in a marrying season of life, but in every season of life. Mm-hmm. And so to ask me who I am, I know that it's not about what I do, but that's an outpouring of who I am. I'm someone who has gone through difficult things, and I have been lazy in my life at moments. We all are. And at the same time, I want to grow the things that matter in my life. I don't want to waste my life. And so I'm passionate about doing that for myself first, and then seeing that success, helping others to do the same.
Okay, man, there's so much there.
No, I kind of just went, no, let's breathe over it.
Yeah, it's great.
That's 20 years in a nutshell. So,
and I do want to eventually talk about the marriage thing, and that we'll probably have to have you back on, because I think there's a lot of people that would say,
love to.
When you marry someone with a different faith perspective, that's stupid, right? And you may be like, yeah, it was actually, but we got through it. I have a family member who recently was engaged, called it off because that was a huge part of it. And so we'll get to that. That'll be maybe next season.
Sounds great.
We'll get to that because there's plenty that we have here. I want to go back to Cultivate What Matters, and we'll get to the whole thing, but it's interesting because I didn't realize this. It was during your talk that you got up and you showed a picture. And it was a picture that I had seen, even though I didn't know it was you, because you kind of had a viral moment that really, helped. You guys were already doing great things, right? But it kind of put you in front of people and celebrities and everything. Can you tell that story about that?
You're gonna make me cry, John. So I became a mom in 2011, and when we had our daughter, whose name is Grace, who we named after the gift we had been given in our marriage. My husband came to faith 12 years ago. She's 12 years old, and professed faith in Christ, and everything changed since then. I sat in my kitchen late one night and just being dumbfounded by the fact that, and I say fact with like neon lights, the fact that nothing is impossible with God. Like he actually can change anything. And I had so much, and I still do, mounting evidence for that in my own life. I sat in my kitchen late one night and I thought, there's more. If I want my daughter to know this power that I know from all that God has done in my life, I need to read the Bible from start to finish for the first time. And I had been scared to do that. I'd been a Christian for a long time, and obviously I'd read the scripture, I'd studied the scripture, but the idea of reading the Bible from start to finish intimidated me because I don't have a degree in theology, and I didn't grow up in a church-going home, and I really found God, or he found me. And it wasn't a formal acquaintance. So I felt very intimidated by that. And so I said to myself, all those things you've always wanted to do, you should go do them. Like, just get over this and go read that thing, I had all these voices in my head saying, you're going to fail. You're not going to follow through. You're not going to do this. And so I wrote this note to myself, all those things you've always wanted to do, you should go do them. And then I published it on a website called Tumblr, which some people may remember.
Yeah.
And it quickly went viral. And when I say went viral, I mean, it's still going viral.
Yeah.
And I see those words and they're used in the context of like, let's go skydiving, let's live our dreams. But really it was about doing the thing that I knew mattered most at the time. And that is to read God's word. Obviously I've read the Bible now from start to finish many times over since then. But it was that one moment, that pivot point that went viral in my own life, in my own heart, and changed everything. So yeah, it's a crazy moment. We started selling prints of that and it's been shared by like P. Diddy. Do they still call him that? I don't even know if they still call him that. I'm not like a culture person. So, all the celebrities you can think of, they have shared it at this point. And
yeah, like weren't you saying like Gwyneth Paltrow and like...
Yeah, like Gwyneth Paltrow and Lauren Conrad and all these folks. But anyway, I pray though that that the Lord has continued to use that to point people back to the original story.
That is great, right? That's awesome. Like I love
Pretty
that
cool.
To the original story, right? And so now we have it. We have it solidified in lore. On That Was Stupid, and there we go. So then let's kind of rewind a little bit because you start Southern Weddings. You have no publishing background, which that's also kind of stupid. Walk us through that. Like, what made you decide to do that?
Yeah. So, John, that's the perfect word for it because I kept saying to myself, I just got to ask a lot of stupid questions. And that is honestly how that magazine happened. I had more passion than a hen has feathers. I didn't have any experience, but I wanted it. Here's the thing is it came after a period of time when I had started dabbling in wedding planning. So another story for another day, but I was dabbling in wedding planning. My mom, I grew up with her entertaining all the time. So kind of entertaining and celebrating people was in my blood. And I fell in love with the world of weddings. And I thought, I want to show my tiny little town in Pensacola that there's more to weddings than stuffed chicken and tulle, that you can really tell. Nothing wrong with those, but you can really tell someone's story and it can be redemptive and it can transform the people that are there. So I have a degree in music and theater, and all of these things very much translated to the production of weddings because you're using music and light and sound and art and a menu and words and colors and textures to tell a story. And just like a great piece of theater, it can transform people. And so in my own tiny way, I thought, let's start a magazine. Let's just print it off on our computers and we will put it in little grocery stores and churches or whatever we can do. And it just quickly snowballed, not by my efforts, truly, but there were no other independent publishers at the time. This is the time when Blogger had just come on the scene. Like no one knew what a blog was. They were thinking Blob, the movie,
Yeah.
So I had to literally ask a lot of stupid questions. I remember calling an actual publishing house in my hometown for the first time, like a printer that runs things off copy printers. And I said, hey, I have this little magazine that I want to publish. And they said, are you using Quark? So if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's a publishing program that was used a long time ago before Adobe came along. And so I was like, no, I have no idea. I'm using Microsoft Publisher. How does one use Quark? How do you? And so anyway, the long answer here, the short answer is that anything that I have done in my life has been because of one fact. There's a author that I love, Jim Quick, and he studies brain science. And he always says the answer is the question.
Amen.
And that is true. Like the answer to what you need or what you need to learn is always in your next question. So just keep asking questions. Eventually you're going to land on the right question, which will give you the answer. So I just asked those really dumb questions.
I love that. Listen, I think the best compliment anyone has ever given me, and I totally agree, and it's what has gotten me along in life, right, is they said, it was actually a friend of mine, and we were driving back from New Orleans. He was an Air Force pilot. We're driving back to his base, and I was going to fly out. And we were high school friends, but we were just kind of catching up. And so I was just asking questions, and like we're driving down the interstate, he stops. And they in high school, everyone calls you by your last name because we played football. So like in football, they plaster your last name on the front of your helmet. So he goes, Seidel, can I just say, has anyone ever told you that you ask really great questions? And I will never forget that moment.
I love that. And that's true of you.
Well, thank you. And it's just like, and it's not, to your point, it's not like I set out and was like, I'm going to become a great question asker. It's just, right. I'm just like, no, I want to learn. I want to know, you know? And so it's really that pursuit of knowledge, right? And I, as someone, you talked about you studying theater and music in college. I was a philosophy major, and Socrates goes to the Oracle of Delphi, and she says, you are the most wise, like you're the wisest man in the world. And he goes, no, I'm not. And she goes, exactly. That's why you're the wisest man in the world, because you know you're not the wisest man in the world, right? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, like that's always stuck with me. So I think your point about questions is so good. And as someone who has built empires, I think that's a great lesson from you. So thank you for sharing that. So Southern Weddings is clipping along. You kind of given us the Cliff Notes version, but you then, like, how does that really snowball into Cultivate What Matters, which, my wife knew what Cultivate What Matters is. How does it snowball into that?
Yeah. So I think the answer is so akin to your heart, John, for stories. I just instantly thought of a photo shoot that we did for Southern Weddings, which was called the Heirloom Tomato Shoot. That was our, inside the office name for it. And we did a shoot that was all based on the history of the South. And I have this big print here in my office that I'm looking at right now that's framed, that has our mission statement from Southern Weddings on it. So this really was the catapult for Cultivate What Matters. I'm just going to read one sentence from it. We believe that planning for a wedding means planning for more than just one day, but there is nothing on this earth more important than family, and that while details are nice, true love always, always wins. And there was another part of that said, we believe in planning a wedding around the SEC football schedule. So there's just, the point is there's a story here, right? There's a culture, there are memories. And my grandfather grew up as a sharecropper, one of 11 children. He was actually in part of a world record. He and 5 of his brothers enlisted at the same time. And he grew up in Excel, Alabama, in a tiny little town. And so they knew a thing or two about growing tomatoes. And so for me to do this shoot was to carry on the legacy of my grandfather. It was not about pretty wedding dresses. It was about a story. And that is really what the Lord has placed on my heart, is to continue to tell great stories that end up transforming people. And so as we continue to do that, more people caught on. People want to know stories. They want to hear great stories that inspire them to live a better life and equip them to live a better life. And so that is very much the heart of Cultivate. We sat in a Southern Weddings meeting one day and we said, there's so much more here. We want to help people not just in a marrying stage of life, but in any stage of life. We had this whole crop of brides that were going on to their newlywed life, and we were starting to put a little lifestyle content in the end of the magazine. And we're like, okay, wait, we need to help them with their lives. And so we sat and we thought, well, what exactly are we trying to do here? We're trying to help them cultivate, which means to break up the fallow ground and prepare it for new growth, for maybe a family, or to be a grandparent one day, or whatever stage of life you're in. And so, like I said, it started with just those prints. We still had Southern Weddings going at the time. And we started what was at the time called the Lara Casey Shop, which we changed the name to Cultivate eventually, with prints that had words on them that we hoped would inspire. And around that same time, I created what is still called the Power Sheets Intentional Goal Planner, to help women do that, to help them uncover what matters and make an action plan, and then live out what matters in their life little by little. So that also, again, just spiraled from this platform of Southern Weddings. And before we knew it, we had 2 enormous businesses on our hand with one tiny team.
Yeah,
And
you had
I
like
know
a group of like 5 women like
we did.
meeting in your garage or something.
Yes, 100%. I still have the shipping department sign above my garage. Obviously, we since moved on to a big 3PL, but yeah, it was like that for a long time, and I loved every bit. One of the hallmarks of Southern weddings was sending a handwritten thank you note out with every single issue. Even as we grew, even after 10 years, and that partnership with Time Inc. and Southern Living, we still made sure that we carried that mission through. So it was a lot of work, but every single handwritten note to me is like a seed planted.
So the power sheets, bring us back to that. How did that idea spawn? I mean, you kind of gave us the overview, but like specifically.
Yeah. So I sat at my desk in the midst of all of this with all these things to manage at the time. I was a new mom. I had these 2 growing companies. I was doing a lot of branding work at the time too to help other small businesses. And I remember coming to the end of a year and thinking, as I looked back, how I could have made progress on the things that matter to me more if I just would have tended to them little by little over time. It wasn't rocket science to me, but it was just purely I forgot. Like we are creatures who forget. I mean, in scripture, it says hundreds of times over the word remember for a reason, because God knows that we would forget. He wanted us to raise an Ebenezer and put all these markers in place and tell these stories to our children, because we are creatures that forget.
Yeah.
And so I created for myself at first the tending list is what I called it. And it was just a simple list on paper of these are the things that matter to me that I know that if I were to tend to them, just like my garden, little by little over time, towards the end of the year, I would look back and say, wow, that progress really added up. And then, of course, I had a process of introspection and uncovering the things that I should focus on, because there's a lot in our lives that tries to get our attention. And that became the first power sheets. I released them just to my branding clients at first, and then printed a big run, and we sorted them by hand in my garage, and here we are millions of people later. It's really remarkable.
So let me go back to even with Southern Weddings and then Cultivate What Matters, because now they're both really at this point in the story they're really successful. I know one of the things that with my wife and her business that was always maybe a pain point, but it's like, when do you know that it's time to start hiring help, right? Especially if you're like a solopreneur, entrepreneur, because that can be scary, right? Because then, all of a sudden you're splitting the money and there's benefits, and it can get overwhelming. How do you know when you need to hire help?
Well, John, this is another one of those that was stupid moments because I did it with no business background, no business degree. It was probably a little risky at the time, but it was like, I need help. I need to hire help. I have no money for help. So I'm going to, as most small business owners do, funnel everything that I'm making into getting help and then eventually pay myself, right?
Right.
So that's what I did. In the very beginning, I remember putting it out on Craigslist.
Oh my goodness.
This is way back, This is way back. But I did eventually hire through an actual listing on our website 2 amazing young women. One whose maiden name I will share, Catherine Waterman, actually was a recent graduate from Harvard at the time. And Emily Armstrong, that's her maiden name, now Thomas. I have chills because Emily is still at Cultivate 15 years later now. We worked together for 14 years. And wow. Catherine went on to a whole nother career and just did wonderful things for us. But I did what any small business owner would do. I had to pay them pennies at first, and they grew with us. And I did my best to keep afloat and keep pouring into them. But I'm sure I made all the mistakes in the beginning. So the answer to how do you know when it's time is you have to take a risk. You have to take a risk for the bigger picture. And for me, I had a big picture vision that was, I want to get this into the hands of brides across the South. This was Southern Weddings at the time. And so in order to do that, I'm going to have to think bigger than what I think I need right now. I have to think about what I need in 2 years from now and get ahead of myself. That doesn't always work out, and it's going to make you stretched at some points. But for me, the key has always been, where do I want to be when I'm 80 years old? And how do I work backwards? Same with business decisions. Where do I want to be in the next 3-4 years? And what kind of support do I need to get there?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. That is
It's not
great.
easy though. Like, trust me, I get it. It's not easy to take a risk, but you got to take risks for what matters.
And that got me thinking too, because I know this is something, my wife and I both have our own companies, right? And we both have each other's companies, right? It's like we have our own quote unquote own
Yes.
companies, but it's like we kind of did a funny thing yesterday. I finally gave her an email address at my company, and we're kind of like, what?
That's
Why did
great.
Why did we
Great.
not? Why have we
Yeah.
not done this over the last
That's
4
awesome.
years? And I'm like, I don't know. So how do you? And I think this is it's different for men than it is for women. But how do you, as a woman, how have you either successfully or unsuccessfully navigated being a entrepreneur, being a mom? How do you you're talking about stuffing, letters and stuff in your garage, right? How do you balance that, being a mom and an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's the golden question. I think the key is that the word is balance, that there's never an equilibrium, that there's a give and take. And I will say, John, that I have worked really darn hard in my career, like so hard. There have been times that I have been stretched too thin, and I've learned from those times. And I think it's much like our relationship with God. Like, why can't I just pray once and then feel total peace from the Lord and then be done? It's the same with the way we balance the priorities in our life. And actually, that's a misnomer, what I just said. The true root of the word priority means one thing. So the plural of priority it's strange. It actually came in the 1980s when the workforce was changing, and suddenly there was an S on the end of that word, which is a total misnomer. So the answer is always checking in as consistently as possible with the big picture. For me, that's my relationship with God. And then second to that would be, Lord, what's your plan for this? And of course, like, I do my best to know for sure what that is. And sometimes, most of the time, you have to have faith. Like that truly is the answer, even though it seems like a non-answer, is having faith that in every season I am putting my work and, or let me rephrase that I'm putting my effort and my energy in the places where it needs to go. Now, there is one tactical, practical thing I will say, though. No matter if you're a founder or, an entrepreneur or a worker bee at a company or whatever it is, whether you're a man or a woman, you have got to take time away. Perspective is the key. For me, even these last 2 years that I've had since Cultivate was acquired have been the greatest gift of perspective. But even before that, having quarterly times where I'm stepping away, having a weekly time where I'm stepping away. I mean, we were made for Sabbath. That is real. And that is how we work well, is by having perspective and stepping away. So that's part of kind of the rhythm that I actually implemented into the Power Sheets, was a quarterly goal refresh, because I needed it myself. I needed a constant reminder of where my priority is and ordering my life accordingly after that.
So again, at this point in the story, you've got two really successful companies. How and maybe you've already given the answer, and so it could be simple, but how are you managing overwhelm? Because I think there's a lot of people out there, whether you're a business owner, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you're a factory worker, dad, right? Like, we all feel overwhelmed. How are you managing
I can speak to that from that perspective then and now. They're very different answers. I think then it was, I never did work in a silo. I had a wonderful, truly gifted team. And I mean that for my personal life as well, like having childcare and having a supportive husband. And it certainly wasn't all halos and roses. I was about to say rose beams. That sounds lovely too. But how did I manage it back then? I don't think I did very well, but I tried my best. And mostly it was just because I wasn't doing it alone. And now I will say it is extremely different. It's just night and day. How do I do it now? I do it from a different place of being seasoned and knowing in my second half of life, in the second half journey, so much more what matters after going through loss. I lost my dad, lost my best friend last year. Just, with your story, John, these deep-seated things as we grow older, or really no matter what age, they change us and they help us to see, okay, it's not that you need to balance these things. It's just you got to cut something out. Like you cannot grow everything in a garden at the same time and expect everything to be fruitful. Something has to go. And I think as you mature and as you grow in business, you grow in faith in business, you start to be able to take the risks of pruning things to let other things grow.
And by the way, Lara is not just using a great analogy there. She is actually an amazing gardener. And so if you follow her on Instagram,
I was just picking flowers a little while ago.
like she's growing amazing stuff. So like this is an analogy that comes from deep experience. And so speaking of pruning, then you eventually decide to go kind of all in on Cultivate What Matters. Walk us through that decision and what happened and what you did with Southern Weddings.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you say I decided. I did not decide. That was like God very clearly saying, there's no way you can hold both of these things at once. And it stinks to let go of things that you love. I mean, I loved Southern Weddings with all my heart and soul. And yet over the period of about 2 years, I kept hearing God say, you have got to lay this down because there's something bigger and better ahead. And bigger and better, not in a business world sense, but spiritually, and not just for yourself, of course. It's not really about you. It's for other people. And as I started to feel that tension of having one small team with 2 growing companies, there were a lot of questions, of course, like, why can't you just sell Southern Weddings? Why can't you let it be acquired by, let's say Southern Living? We had a great partnership with them. Why not hire a whole nother team to run that business? And the answer was Grace, my daughter. I was homeschooling her at the time, and I thought even the idea of hiring another team for me to manage, really, no matter who was really doing the managing on a day-to-day basis, still being the owner of having a whole nother team and training them, is not something I have or want the energy to do right now. I need to pour into Grace as she was starting kindergarten. And so that was a very clear line to me. I was like, Lord, okay, that's a clear priority. We did go through the process of considering acquisition and ultimately heard God say, no, you've actually completed the work you've been given to do. And I don't want any other entity to come in and change the heart of this.
Wow.
To change your Christ-centered heart for this mission.
Wow.
And that's when I had peace about it, finally. I just thought, oh, you're right. Nothing was lost. We've created something, I have chills telling you, that can live on. The website is still up. You can still go to southernweddings.com and see every single love story, every single spread from the magazine. I still have people every day that say, I have a copy of Southern Weddings on my coffee table. I'm never going to get rid of it. So I'm so grateful for that it stayed intact in that way. But I'm not going to lie. It's not easy to let go of something good. It's truly like cutting fruit off a tree. But I had to have, again, faith. I had to have faith. I didn't know what was ahead in retiring Southern Weddings, and I didn't know how people were going to react. This felt like a very this is stupid.
Yeah.
But I was a part of a C12 group at the time, and
explain to people what C12 is real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So C12 is an amazing organization. I highly, highly recommend it, where they get business owners together in a group of about 12 entrepreneurs to go through curriculum, to pray together, and to really do business and life and entrepreneurship alongside each other. And part of that is having roundtable discussions about challenges like this, or new growth phases, or whatever it is, employee challenges, anything. And so I remember bringing this to my C12 group and saying, okay, I've got these 2 beautiful things growing, and you're like, Lara, I'm using your word again, John, but this is what they said. They said, Lara, you're stupid. Like, why are you waiting to do this? There's so much growth potential with Cultivate. And they knew, all of our numbers and things too. And they just thought the potential reach that you have for the gospel and for good here that's just where it's at.
Was there, I think I talked about this in my post, but was there a grief period, or was it because you knew for sure, like you are so confident in this? Like how did that play out?
Yeah, certainly. I've learned over these years And especially that was like a inciting incident, if you will, like the first big thing that God asked me to surrender. Besides my own stubbornness when I became a Christian, but that was certainly an open door for grief. And now I have learned, though, that grief is so formative. Grief changes us. It actually leads us forward to do life with more gusto and zest in the ways that actually matter. So yes. And like I said, I had a ton of fear. Like, what were our advertisers going to think? What were our partners going to think? What were all these people going to think that invested so much in us over so many years? It was certainly a difficult period. So no, I can't sugarcoat any of that. It was hard, but obedience is hard. It's like, I still knew that this was all God. And so, yes, I'm not going to go anywhere that he's not going. And now in retrospect, that was 2017 when we retired the magazine. Very shortly after that, we're in the 2020 period where the entirety of publishing has been shut down. And even before that, like the 2 years before that, just magazine sales in general were really starting to change. So we were already in kind of a, where are we going digitally with this? So I'll say we made our digital move before that.
That's a great point. And I love what you said about obedience. I mean, that's one of the key pillars when I look back at my recovery journey. That, the 4 steps I talk about, that's step number 4 is obedience. Right. And I love that, obedience is hard. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I've had to do that I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And the whole point, by the way, of them was not like for the conversation that God told me to have, the email he told me to send was not for the actual end result of that conversation, the end result of that email. It was to
it's bigger,
cultivate, if you will, an attitude and a habit of obedience. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I absolutely love that. So 2017, you retire the magazine, and now you have Cultivate What Matters, and that's going great. But then you start getting the sense that it's time to move on from there. Walk us through what you started thinking, and that's really that was stupid. Like, you have something going so great, doing so well, and you're like, it might be time.
Yeah, and I have to say, it was going well in general. Business is hard for anybody. I can't say it was all going totally amazing for my nervous system.
Right.
But yes, we were making a profit, doing it on cash, and like we were successful in that way. And I love my team, and I really cannot complain. But I do want to make sure that people know it wasn't just I closed a magazine and then everything got better from there. No, we had cash flow trouble because here we had 2 businesses. One was feeding one. It's like having 2 departments of an e-commerce business almost. And so we had to basically gut our whole financial system, relearn that. So there was a period where it was very difficult. But that was all a foundation for us to grow. And we saw amazing growth rates since then. So with that caveat, I want to say that, yes, there came a period where just like I was staking up sunflowers outside. We're in the middle of a storm right now, and my sunflowers are falling over from the rain. They're enormous. They're those 12-foot mammoth ones that I plant just for the magic of them for our children,
Yeah.
They're just so fantastic. And yet when it rains really intensely like this, they go, woo. They're very droopy. They're like talking to us. So I'm out there doing this manual labor of like gathering them all up in my arms, and I'm covered in bugs and stuff and tying them up. And I'm just thinking about pruning again, thinking about staking things up that you can't do it all and do it well, but you can choose to cultivate what matters, right? I had to do a lot of pruning out there too. I started to feel some tension when the business started growing beyond me. And I have learned that I have a capacity for a certain level of business, that I love, 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 love growing business. I don't want to do it at a corporate level. I don't want to do it in a way where I don't have a personal touch with the consumer, where I don't have a personal touch with my team. And when it gets too big, I start to feel that distance. And here's where the surrender comes, John. This is like the stupid part is, to use your word, this is when I had to stop and say, this is bigger than what I can hold. So maybe somebody else needs to grow it. Like maybe it's not that it needs to be smaller for me in my own things. Maybe actually, Lord, I'm holding this up to you. Maybe I don't need to prune this. Maybe somebody else just needs to take it and run with it. And that kept coming to mind. And in fact, doors started opening where investors started coming to me and saying, hey, we see you're doing a really good thing. We'd like to be a part of it. And I was like, wait, what? Investors, whole new language. So that also was a big season of entertaining multiple investors. And we got to the end actually with one set of investors, and it ended up falling through at the last minute. And this was just at the time when my father started to be very ill in the hospital. And my youngest daughter, she has special needs. And so her needs were starting to grow. My health was suffering. I was going through chronic pain. So many things were saying to me, Lara, it's not about taking on investors and taking on people. It's that you have got to be obedient and put this in somebody else's hands. And I get choked up talking about it still, John, because to let go of a business that you love for its sake, for other people's sake, it's unexplainable to make that sacrifice for something that truly is my whole heart and soul. And yet I knew it needed to happen. And so praise the Lord, it did. It was not an easy season by any means. If anyone's been through an acquisition, you know this, and especially when it's something that's so close to your heart, but I knew it had to go to other hands. So yeah, here we are 2 years post-acquisition, and I still miss it every day. And I still feel that grief, like you mentioned. But that grief keeps calling me forward to remind me, wow, I'm so blessed. I had such a great career, and they're carrying on the work that I started. And to use Bob Buford's words, they're growing fruit on other people's trees. And that's all I could ask for. And I had no idea what was ahead for me either. I had to have faith in this to say, I know that I need to focus more on my health and my family and my dad, as he passed a couple of years ago. He passed about a month after Cultivate was acquired. But I'm the one that got to be there at his bedside. I'm the one that got to hold his hand while the Lord walked him home. And to be that one with nothing else on my mind, with no other spreadsheets or employees or people on my mind, at that moment, I felt free. And I was just so grateful. It was a privilege to get to walk him home. So I didn't know what the Lord had next for me either. But again, that's where we step out on faith and obedience.
Wow.
Yeah, I gotta take a breath too.
Yeah, that is, and I think there's a lot of people that, like, when you talk about that freedom, it's not necessarily I think you find that freedom in obedience, right? So I think, it's not necessarily like, Laura, you were acquired, so you have the ability to have that freedom. And I don't think that's the point of your story. Your point of the story is not like, oh my gosh, I was acquired, and so, I was taken care of, and now I don't. It's that was found in obedience, right? And it was like, that's the freedom too, because when I talk about obedience in the book that I'm working on as well, it's like, I can't tell you how much freedom I have found in obedience, and it is just so good.
And it's always painful. It's like the sting of obedience. It's almost like akin to when we confess a sin to someone or trying to reconcile a relationship. And even just that, like the sting of sin, and then whoosh, we're free. It's the same thing with the gift of obedience. I love that.
And like, it's still hard, right? You talk about some, I'm sure there are times that you look back and or maybe you even see the company doing something that you're like, that would have been.
Cried for 2 years, John.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating or like being facetious. Like, I feel it every day. Yeah.
Like in the news business, I knew I had to give that up, right? Like for my mental health, for my personal health, for my family. But I'm looking at people who I was the boss of that are now like prominent people on CNN, prominent people on Fox News. Like, and I'm like, well, could that have been me? And well, like, could I get back into it? And I'm just like, on one hand, there is a grief, but on the other hand, there's a relief because I know that I couldn't do that. And I'm just reminded, like, the Lord has something, and he's revealed that in a lot of ways, right? Like, and yet there's still things that he's revealing to me. And so I think but being in that obedience and walking in that is like, and yet I feel a freedom, for sure.
Yeah.
So what is Lara Casey doing now? So 2 years. It's been 2 years ish, since Cultivate was acquired. What did you, I mean, was it kind of like a 2 year period of resting and refinding yourself and rewiring yourself? What was that 2 years like, and what does that mean, and what does that prepare you to do now?
Yeah, so I will say that I was cultivated over these 2 years. And when I say cultivated, I mean like the shovel shoved into my soul. And if you see an actual cultivator machine, it's no joke. It's violent, right? It like messes up the soil. And so to me, that is a great way to describe my last 2 years. I went through the grief of losing a business, and when I say losing a business, obviously I chose this. I'm the one that said, I would like you to take this on, but it still was loss. It was a loss of everything that I had known up to that point. Losing my dad, heaven's gain, but losing my dad, losing my best friend over these 2 years, I have gone through significant grief. And then just the change of identity, like always being on and being the CEO and doing work in a certain way, juxtapose that with my own health journey too, and suffering for so long from chronic pain, which a lot of it was related to stress and carrying all these things. So what has the last 2 years been like? It's been a privilege to be able to serve my family. That's what it's been like. To be able to be there for the moments with my kids that I wouldn't have been able to be there for in the ways that I could have previously. And, I didn't work 40 hours at the end before, but still I've been able to be at therapy with our youngest and help my almost teenager process emotions and support my husband in his new things. And then in April, I think it was, of this year, I got an email from someone we both know saying, hey, we would like you to come speak at Harvard on flourishing at work. And I was like, I don't work. I'm the CEO of my laundry room. And John, I remember telling you this at my table because I was still in flux with it. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to share my story, but really, like, y'all have the wrong person.
And I remember me asking you, so what do you do? And you had a really hard time answering that question.
I could not answer. And it took me a good 24 hours to actually spit an answer out because God was still working on me and I didn't want to answer. I think I had learned in wisdom over those 2 years that to answer is to define something that only the Lord can define. And so my answer was my answer. It's like, I take care of my children. I love doing this. I'm so grateful. I'm restless, but not for another business. I just want to make sure that I'm being obedient to the Lord and using my gifts. Oh.
And there's the cat. That's okay. We love that.
Yeah. She said, and you really needed to spend more time with me. She's on my chair now.
This is great,
that's true, actually. But I got an email from them and just said, hey, we want you to come speak at Harvard. Hey, I don't have a business anymore. Are you sure you want me to do this? Yes, that's precisely why we want you to do this. We know your story. We want you to speak on flourishing and life happiness. And so I said, yeah, I can talk about that because that's been my story. And so that is where, of course, I met you. And I got on the plane afterwards and just felt very distinctly the Lord opening a door saying, okay, I had the door completely shut on you up until this point. I had no intentions, truly, John, zero intentions on doing anything else but just abiding and being here, which is a ton of work. It's not, I don't want to minimize it. But I just remember him saying, okay, you need to help people. You need to help founders flourish. You need to help in whatever way you're able to, and you need to have your hands open.
So that's where you're at now?
Yes. And I have started a new role. As of this podcast recording, I'm allowed to talk about it. I'm so thankful to be the CEO, the Chief Education Officer of Faith Driven Students, alongside the Faith Driven Investor and Faith Driven Entrepreneur team, the whole Faith Driven movement. I've known them for so long through my time at C12 and working with Mike Sharrow on some video pieces for them. It's a dream come true. And I never would have envisioned this coming out of the woodworks. But I remember when Foreman at Faith Driven emailed me the first time, he's like, hey, I want to talk to you about this new ministry that we're starting to help kids in ages 10 through 18 in this formative stage where there is a blue ocean of opportunity for us to come in and open their eyes to the possibilities of what it looks like to be a faith-driven entrepreneur, and how do we equip them to do so? How do we help them run on mission, even from those small ages, and plant those seeds? I thought, oh, he's just going to get on the phone with me and maybe we'll talk about me being on a podcast interview about this because I'm a homeschool mom. I'm really passionate about this. He said, no, we're looking for an executive. And my jaw just went to the floor because I just felt the Lord's peace. I thought, oh my goodness, Lord, you've been preparing this for me all my life. That it wasn't about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. I get to serve in this. I mean, John, you can hear my voice. I'm pretty excited.
Yes. And I'm interested because you told me it's technically a part-time role, right? Which I think is fascinating, is because you, for the 2 years, you talk about the cultivation and everything that happened. And yet, it's not like, okay, this opportunity comes along and now I'm just like, that was a great 2 years. I think you're taking some of the stuff that you've learned over the last 2 years, you're implementing here. How does that work? How are you able to do a C-suite part-time, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they actually offered me the role at first and I said no, because I said, my whole heart and soul is convicted alongside obedience, our word for today, to focus on my family and focus on my health and my marriage and all the things that the Lord has given me to cultivate here in my home. And yet I can give you this, I can give you these hours. And guess what? I think I can actually do a whole lot with those hours. I mean, I think you get to this point in entrepreneurship or in a career or in your skills where you're able to really focus. And I'm sure I won't do it perfect all the time, but I think I can give them exactly what they need for this particular role. And I'm just thrilled that they're given the opportunity to do so.
So you may have kind of brushed on it already, but the question I love to ask at the end, everyone, is, what do you think is the lesson of your That Was Stupid story or stories?
Trust the Lord and to just keep saying yes to him. And inherent in that is to be able to listen to him. And so for me, that happens on my day-to-day, not just in a mountaintop moment, but every day. Am I stepping away from my desk? Am I stepping away from my life to tap into the life that is truly life? And that might mean being out in my garden, trimming zinnias like I was before this, just to get my mind and my head and my heart in the right place. It might mean sitting and playing Legos with my son like I did last night after a long phone call. Whatever it is, listening to the Lord and obedience. And he's so faithful, John. He's so faithful. He does things beyond our wildest imaginations.
So it's funny you mentioned playing Legos, right? Like my son, my 6-year-old son, is in his Lego phase, or his Lego era. Yep. And so yesterday it was really funny. So he's had some dental issues that we're trying to get fixed. And so we promised him, like, hey, if you're good at the dentist yesterday, we'll get you a Lego set. We get him a Lego set. We come home and I end up, he's 6, right? So it's like, I end up building it mostly. And I'm like starting to feel my age. I like get up and like, I almost fall over because I realize, oh my gosh, this quote unquote small Lego set, right? I've been building this thing for like 2 hours, but then I'm like, I just wouldn't trade this for the world. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah. It's life-giving because it reminds me again that it's all about relationship. That I want to have the margin for relationship because that's really where the things that last happen. Just acutely losing my best friend very quickly to cancer, and very fast and out of nowhere. It's like that will snap you in place right away and say, okay, this is the only thing that matters, is these little teeny connections.
Well, that's a great lesson. It's a great thing to end on here. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for sharing the nitty gritty, the details. And we're going to obviously have to have you back to talk about your marriage, because your husband's like a man's man. Like he's in the military, right? And
he has military background and
so there's a lot more that we can talk about. And so, blessings on this new endeavor. I'm excited to see what you do, because, a lot of the stuff, and I don't say this in a overly like sappy way, but the stuff you touch turns to gold, right? But I think why it's doing that is because you are you truly are living in that obedience. You truly are living in that abiding.
I'm trying. I fail all the time, but that is very encouraging, John. Thank you.
Which
I think
ironically,
it's really the pursuit of it is.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
The abiding and the obedience are two of the four steps that I talk about in my new book. So it's
Which I'm so
just
excited for.
I know. You and me both, right?
Yes.
It's due this month. So so I'm going to record this podcast and then I'm going to go
Fantastic.
write. So Lara, thank you so much. If anyone wants to learn more about you or connect, maybe there's a faith-driven entrepreneur that's listening to this. Maybe there's a woman who's looking for help and advice. Where should they go?
Yes, hop on over to laracasey.com or faithdrivenstudents.org. Would love to have you come on over and see the good things that the Lord has in store.
Lara, thank you so much for joining That Was Stupid. I can't wait to have you back on again.
Same.
I hope you can see now why Lara is just one of my favorite people. We have become fast friends and really, like I said, hit it off with her at that conference at Harvard. And I'm just so encouraged by her story. I'm so encouraged by her obedience. I'm so encouraged by her diligence to abide. If you follow my writing on my readdearjohn.com, you know that talking about abiding, talking about obedience is a big thing, and it's going to be a big part of my next book, like I said. So please do look up Lara. She is, I just think, this new role that she talked about and just others, like she is going to be around for a while doing some amazing things. And I am so glad that I get to be in her aura, if you will. If you liked this episode, if you like any episode, please subscribe, follow, share, be honored. Please spread this message that we're talking about on the That Was Stupid podcast. And until next time, we'll talk soon.